Marcus Hayes was no ordinary chef. He had a deep passion for food, which came from a long line of family traditions rooted in soul food. His grandmother had taught him the basics when he was just a child, and over the years, he had honed those skills into a refined culinary art. Now, as one of the key chefs at El Grand Epicurean, a prestigious fine dining restaurant, Marcus had built a reputation not just for his incredible dishes, but for the warmth and creativity he brought to the kitchen. El Grand Epicurean was an upscale restaurant known for its high standards, attracting an elite clientele, but it was also a place where the team felt like family. Marcus was the heartbeat of that family. He had been with the restaurant for several years, rising through the ranks with dedication and a flair for innovation that kept both his colleagues and regular patrons on their toes. His signature style of blending traditional Southern flavors with contemporary techniques earned him high praise, and people came specifically for his dishes. Marcus had dreams beyond just being a talented chef. He wanted to open his own restaurant one day, a place that fused his culinary roots with the elegance of modern fine dining. Every dish he created was a step toward that vision. His colleagues admired him not just for his skill, but also for his leadership. He was the one they turned to when they needed advice or when the pressure of a busy service became overwhelming. His calm demeanor and focus were infectious, and he had the unique ability to bring out the best in everyone. But Marcus's world began to change the day Mr. Huxley walked into the kitchen. Huxley was the new head chef, brought in by the restaurant's owner to elevate the restaurant's profile even further. On paper, Huxley was impressive. He had worked in Michelin-starred restaurants across Europe, and his resume was filled with accolades. But the moment Marcus met him, something felt off. It wasn't just the coldness in Huxley's handshake, or the dismissive way he glanced around the kitchen. It was something deeper, an unspoken tension that Marcus couldn't quite put his finger on. At first, Marcus hoped he was just being overly cautious. He had worked with difficult chefs before. Being in the restaurant industry, it was part of the deal. So, he extended a hand of friendship, offering to show Huxley the ropes and introduce him to the team. But from the outset, Huxley made it clear that he had no interest in collaborating with Marcus or anyone else. He was here to run the kitchen his way, and he didn't need help from someone like Marcus. The first few weeks were tense, but Marcus, ever the professional, kept his head down and did his job. He hoped that over time, Huxley would come to respect him once he saw his dedication and skill. But instead, the opposite happened. It began subtly at first. Huxley would criticize Marcus's dishes for being too rustic or not refined enough. He would praise other chefs in the kitchen for ideas Marcus had clearly initiated. And during meetings, he barely acknowledged Marcus's contributions. The team began to feel the shift too. Conversations that once flowed easily now felt strained, as Huxley's presence loomed over every decision. One day, determined to win Huxley over, Marcus decided to prepare one of his signature dishes for a private tasting. The dish, a fusion of his grandmother's classic fried chicken recipe with a modern twist, using molecular gastronomy techniques, was something he had been working on for months. It was a bold dish, one that had won over some of the toughest critics in the past. Marcus believed that if he could impress Huxley with this, things might turn around. But when the moment came, Huxley barely tasted the dish. He poked at it with his fork, took a single bite, and pushed the plate away without comment. "This is what you've been working on?" he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "I expected something more. This is not the direction I want for this restaurant." The dismissal stung deeply, but it was the way Huxley delivered it that truly hurt. It wasn't just a critique of the dish. It felt like a critique of Marcus himself, his background, his style, his very identity as a chef. From that moment on, things only got worse. Huxley began to make life in the kitchen unbearable for Marcus. He would assign Marcus to menial tasks, things far below his skill level, while giving more high-profile responsibilities to less experienced chefs. In team meetings, Huxley would often overlook Marcus completely, even when his input was crucial. Slowly but surely, Marcus found himself being pushed to the margins. The other chefs in the kitchen noticed too. They saw how Marcus was being sidelined, but Huxley was the head chef now, and no one wanted to be on his bad side. The camaraderie that once defined the kitchen began to erode. People whispered in corners, afraid to speak up in case they became the next target of Huxley's cold indifference. Marcus felt isolated in a place that had once been his second home. It all came to a head one evening during a particularly busy service. The restaurant was packed with patrons, and the kitchen was working at full speed. Marcus had been put on prep duty, an insulting assignment given his seniority, but he kept his head down, determined to make it through the night. As service progressed, a problem arose. One of the newer chefs had made an error on a key dish, a dish that Marcus had perfected over the years. Without thinking, Marcus stepped in to fix it, his instinct as a leader and problem solver kicking in. But instead of thanking him for saving the night, Huxley exploded. In front of the entire kitchen staff, and within earshot of the waitstaff and some of the patrons, Huxley berated Marcus. "Stay in your lane," he yelled. "I don't need your help running this kitchen. Maybe if you focused more on your assigned tasks, we wouldn't have these issues." The humiliation was overwhelming. Marcus stood frozen, his face burning as the kitchen fell silent. No one spoke up for him. No one intervened. In that moment, Marcus knew that he had been systematically broken down, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of the chef who had once been the backbone of this kitchen. Then came the final blow. A few days later, Huxley called Marcus into his office. Without any explanation, Huxley informed him that his services were no longer needed. There was no discussion, no opportunity for Marcus to defend himself or ask for clarification. It was a clean and brutal dismissal. Marcus walked out of El Grand Epicurean with his head spinning. The place he had poured his heart and soul into for years had tossed him aside without a second thought. The world outside the restaurant felt unfamiliar and cold. His dreams of owning his own restaurant seemed farther away than ever, and he wasn't sure where he would go from here. After leaving El Grand Epicurean, Marcus found himself adrift. He had never imagined that his career, which had been on such a promising trajectory, could be derailed so suddenly and unjustly. For the first few weeks after his firing, Marcus was in shock. He avoided talking to friends and family, ashamed to admit what had happened. He felt humiliated, not just by Mr. Huxley's treatment, but by the fact that no one had stood up for him. The kitchen, once his safe space, now felt like a betrayal, and Marcus struggled with a mix of anger, sadness, and self-doubt. As the days passed, Marcus began searching for a new job, but the restaurant industry could be unforgiving. Word of his departure had spread, but without the full story. Rumors circulated that Marcus had been difficult to work with, or that he couldn't keep up with the demands of a high-end kitchen. Mr. Huxley's reputation as a well-connected and renowned chef meant that doors which had once been open to Marcus now seemed firmly closed. For weeks, Marcus sent out resumes, visited restaurants, and applied for positions far beneath his skill level, only to face rejection after rejection. It was a humiliating experience. He had once been a chef, whose name brought diners into El Grand Epicurean, and now he couldn't even secure a line cook position. The weight of these rejections began to take its toll on his confidence. He started questioning his own abilities, wondering if maybe Mr. Huxley had been right all along. Maybe he wasn't cut out for this industry. Eventually, Marcus accepted a job at a small, family-owned diner on the other side of town. It was a far cry from the elegant, fine dining world he had known. The diner served basic comfort food, burgers, fries, and sandwiches, and it catered to a local crowd of regulars who came in more for the conversation than the cuisine. Marcus took on a low-level cooking position, working mostly behind the scenes, flipping burgers, and making simple meals that barely tapped into his extensive culinary skills. The job wasn't glamorous, and the pay was a fraction of what he had been earning before, but it was work. Marcus kept his head down and did what was asked of him. There were no accolades, no praise, no glowing reviews from food critics. Instead, there was the steady hum of the grill, the clatter of plates, and the occasional grunt of approval from a regular customer. It wasn't the life Marcus had envisioned, but it was survival. Despite the monotony, Marcus couldn't let go of his passion for cooking. Even in the midst of his struggles, he found himself experimenting in the kitchen during the diner's slower hours. He began trying new flavor combinations, mixing spices from his grandmother's traditional soul food recipes with more modern techniques he had learned over the years. Some days he would bring in ingredients from home to test out new ideas, even if there was no one around to appreciate them. It was his way of holding on to the dream, even when everything else felt like it was slipping away. But the emotional toll was heavy. Marcus often felt like he was living a double life, one where he played the role of a defeated chef in a small diner, and another where, in the quiet moments of solitude, he still believed in his potential to create something extraordinary. His wife Angela was his rock during this time, always encouraging him to keep going, reminding him of the chef he had been and the dream they had shared of one day opening their own place. But even her unwavering support couldn't always lift the weight of his self-doubt. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at the diner, Marcus sat at home, staring at a blank piece of paper. It was supposed to be his vision for the restaurant he had always dreamed of. But for the first time in years, he couldn't bring himself to write anything down. The creative fire that had once burned so brightly inside him seemed to have dimmed, and he wasn't sure if it would ever reignite. But Angela refused to let him give up. She reminded him of all the people who believed in him, of the patrons who had come to El Grand Epicurean just to taste his food, and of the countless times he had overcome obstacles in the past. Slowly, her words began to break through the fog of Marcus's despair, and he realized that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't finished yet. Then, out of nowhere, a lifeline appeared. One day, while scrolling through social media, Marcus stumbled upon an advertisement for a charity cook-off being held in the city. It was a high-profile event, with some of the best chefs in town competing to raise money for a local food bank. The event was open to anyone who wanted to participate, from seasoned professionals to ambitious amateurs. For a moment, Marcus considered entering, but the voice of doubt crept back in. He hadn't competed in months, hadn't been in a real kitchen since leaving El Grand Epicurean, and certainly hadn't cooked anything worthy of a competition in ages. But Angela, as always, pushed him to go for it. The night before the competition, Marcus stayed up late, perfecting the dish he planned to present. It was a combination of his grandmother's braised oxtail recipe, blended with modern plating and presentation techniques. He wanted to honor his roots while showcasing the skills he had developed over the years. As he stood in the kitchen, tasting the final product, something inside him shifted. The old spark, The fire that had driven him to become a chef in the first place was back, even if only for a moment. When the day of the cook-off arrived, Marcus was a bundle of nerves. He hadn't competed in so long, and the pressure was immense. The other chefs at the event were seasoned veterans, many of whom had established reputations in the city's culinary scene. But as Marcus stepped up to his station, something clicked. The familiar rhythm of the kitchen, the focus required to create something beautiful under pressure, it all came rushing back. As he plated his dish and presented it to the judges, Marcus felt a sense of pride that he hadn't experienced in a long time. This was his food, his story, his heart on a plate. And when the judges tasted it, their reactions were immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Marcus's dish stood out not just for its flavor, but for the soul that had gone into creating it. Among the judges was Evelyn Wright, a renowned food critic known for her discerning palate and her ability to spot talent from a mile away. She had heard of Marcus before, had tasted his food at El Grand Epicurean when he was still at his peak, but this dish was something else entirely. After the competition, Evelyn approached Marcus with an offer that would change his life. She had been impressed not just by his culinary skills, but by the story behind his dish, the way he had blended tradition with innovation, honoring his roots while pushing the boundaries of fine dining. Evelyn told Marcus that she wanted to help him open his own restaurant, something she had been planning to do for a while, but hadn't yet found the right partner for. She believed that Marcus was the chef she had been looking for, someone who could bring something truly unique to the city's food scene. Marcus was stunned. After months of feeling like his career was over, this opportunity felt like a second chance, a chance to finally fulfill the dream he had held onto for so long. With Evelyn's backing and Angela's unwavering support, Marcus began planning his restaurant, Roots and Wings. The name represented everything he had gone through, his deep connection to his culinary heritage, and his ability to rise above the challenges and setbacks he had faced. It was a fusion of soul food and modern techniques, a place where tradition met innovation in every dish. The journey was far from easy. Opening a restaurant from scratch required long hours, meticulous planning, and a level of creativity and commitment that pushed Marcus to his limits. But for the first time in months, he felt alive again. He was doing what he loved, and the support from Evelyn and Angela gave him the confidence he needed to succeed. Little by little, Roots and Wings took shape, and when it finally opened, the response was overwhelming. Patrons flocked to the restaurant, eager to taste the unique fusion of flavors that Marcus had become known for. The reviews were glowing, and food critics praised the restaurant not just for its food, but for its story, Marcus's story. It was a story of resilience, of rising above adversity, of finding strength in the face of defeat. And as Roots and Wings began to thrive, Marcus knew that his journey was far from over. He had been given a second chance, and this time, he wasn't going to let anyone take it away from him. As Roots and Wings officially opened its doors, Marcus stood at the entrance, taking in the scene around him. The restaurant was more than just a business to him. It was a reflection of his journey, his struggles, his victories, and everything in between. Every detail had been carefully thought out, from the design of the space to the dishes on the menu. The decor was modern but warm, with subtle nods to his roots. Photos of his grandmother's kitchen hung on the walls, and there were small touches that paid tribute to the Southern traditions that had shaped him. But the heart of the restaurant was, of course, the food. The menu was a perfect blend of old and new, with dishes that honored Marcus's heritage while pushing the boundaries of what soul food could be. He had taken his grandmother's classic recipes and transformed them with modern techniques he had learned throughout his career. The fried chicken, for example, was brined in buttermilk and served with a light, crispy skin, but it was paired with a delicate truffle-infused honey glaze that elevated it far beyond its humble origins. His collard greens were slow-cooked to perfection, but served alongside a silky smooth puree of roasted garlic and caramelized onions that added a complexity of flavors no one expected. And then there was Marcus's oxtail dish, the one that had brought him back into the spotlight at the charity cook-off. It had quickly become the star of the menu, a rich braised oxtail served with a velvety mashed sweet potato base, topped with microgreens and a drizzle of red wine reduction. It was comfort food, but elevated to a level that left diners speechless. The dish was a love letter to his grandmother's kitchen, but also a statement of Marcus's growth as a chef. It was tradition meeting innovation, a perfect fusion of roots and wings. From the very first night, Roots and Wings was a hit. The restaurant was fully booked for weeks in advance, with food critics and influencers alike clamoring for a reservation. Marcus had poured everything he had into the restaurant, and it showed. Every plate that left the kitchen was a work of art, but more importantly, it was a reflection of his heart. He made sure to greet every table, to connect with the diners, to share his story with them. And people responded to that. They weren't just coming for the food, they were coming for the experience, for the sense of connection that Marcus had managed to create. The media quickly took notice of Marcus's success. Articles were written about him, praising his ability to turn adversity into triumph. Food critics marveled at the depth of flavor in his dishes, and more importantly, the soul behind them. He was no longer just the chef who had been wronged. He was now the face of one of the most talked about new restaurants in the city. Evelyn Wright, the food critic who had given Marcus his second chance, was overjoyed with how well the restaurant had been received. She knew from the moment she had tasted Marcus's food at the cook-off that he had something special, but even she was blown away by the response Roots and Wings had garnered. But the success of the restaurant wasn't just measured by the glowing reviews or the full reservations book. For Marcus, the true victory was in the people he was able to share this journey with. His wife Angela had been by his side through everything, the highs and the devastating lows. She had believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. And now, as they stood in the restaurant they had dreamed of for so long, Marcus knew he couldn't have done it without her. Every night after the last guests had left, they would sit together in the quiet of the dining room, reflecting on how far they had come. And there was Evelyn, who had been more than just a business partner. She had become a mentor and a friend, someone who had seen potential in Marcus when no one else did. She continued to support him in every way, offering guidance when needed, but always trusting his vision for the restaurant. She was proud to be part of this journey, and as the restaurant's success grew, so did their partnership. But Marcus's greatest joy came from the team he had built at Roots and Wings. Many of the chefs and staff had been with him since the beginning, helping him bring his vision to life. They shared his passion for food, his commitment to excellence, and his dedication to creating an environment that was as much about family as it was about fine dining. Marcus made sure to mentor his chefs, just as he had been mentored over the years, teaching them not just the technical skills of the kitchen, but also the importance of creativity, humility, and resilience. The restaurant became a place of growth and opportunity for everyone involved. Young chefs came to work at Roots and Wings, not just for the chance to learn from Marcus, but because of the culture he had created. A kitchen that was supportive, collaborative, and open to all ideas. There was no room for the toxic environments Marcus had experienced in the past. Here, everyone had a voice. and everyone's contributions were valued. And that, Marcus believed, was one of the reasons for the restaurant's success. Patrons could feel it too. Roots and Wings wasn't just a place to eat. It was an experience that connected people to the story of resilience, hope, and the healing power of food. Regulars started coming in, not just for the food, but to be part of the community Marcus had built. Families celebrated special occasions there. Friends gathered for unforgettable meals, and more than a few marriage proposals had taken place at tables overlooking the open kitchen. The restaurant had become more than just a business. It was a place where memories were made. As the months went on, Marcus was inundated with offers, opportunities to expand, to open new locations, to launch a line of products. But he was careful not to lose sight of what made Roots and Wings special. He didn't want to chase after commercial success at the expense of the soul of the restaurant. For Marcus, it was always about the food, the people, and the stories behind both. He took his time with every decision, ensuring that whatever came next was aligned with the vision he had from the very beginning: to create something meaningful, something that honored where he came from and where he was going. One of the most poignant moments for Marcus came when his grandmother, now in her 80s, visited the restaurant for the first time. She had been the inspiration behind so much of his cooking, and seeing her sit at one of the tables, tasting the food she had taught him to make, was emotional for both of them. She was proud of him, not just for what he had accomplished professionally, but for the man he had become. In that moment, Marcus felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had carried her legacy forward, and in doing so, had found his own voice as a chef. Even though Roots and Wings was a soaring success, Marcus remained grounded. He knew that the journey wasn't just about him. It was about the community of people who had supported him, the family who had believed in him, and the team who had worked alongside him. He had gone through the fire and come out stronger on the other side, and now he was committed to giving back, to lifting up others who faced the same struggles he had endured. Marcus started hosting culinary workshops at Roots and Wings for aspiring chefs from underserved communities, offering them a chance to learn, to grow, and to be mentored in a space that celebrated their potential. He wanted to be the kind of mentor he had needed when he was starting out, someone who believed in the power of food to transform lives. And as the restaurant continued to thrive, Marcus never forgot the lessons he had learned along the way. Success, he realized, wasn't just about winning awards or being the best. It was about staying true to your roots, embracing growth, and using your wings to lift others along the way. And in the warmth and hum of Roots and Wings, Marcus had found not just success, but purpose. While Marcus and Roots and Wings were flourishing, the story over at El Grand Epicurean took a very different turn. Without Marcus's steady hand in the kitchen, the restaurant began to falter, though at first, the signs were subtle. At the surface level, it still appeared to be the prestigious establishment it had always been. The elegant dining room, the impeccable service, and the high-profile clientele who continued to walk through its doors all gave the impression that nothing had changed. But inside the kitchen, the cracks were starting to show, and at the center of it all was Mr. Huxley. When Mr. Huxley took over as head chef, he had envisioned himself transforming El Grand Epicurean into a culinary powerhouse. He imagined his name being written up in glossy magazines, winning Michelin stars, and earning accolades that would cement his reputation as a visionary chef. He believed that by asserting his authority and implementing his vision, he could bring the restaurant to new heights. But what Huxley had failed to realize was that a great restaurant wasn't just about one person's vision. It was about the team, the atmosphere, and the creativity that flowed from collaboration. And most importantly, it was about the heart and soul behind the food. In his quest for perfection, Huxley had alienated most of the kitchen staff. The camaraderie that had once defined the kitchen had been replaced by fear and tension. Under Marcus's leadership, the team had worked together like a well-oiled machine. Everyone knew their role, but more importantly, they respected and supported one another. With Huxley at the helm, that dynamic crumbled. He was quick to criticize, slow to praise, and impossible to please. His demands were unreasonable, and his temperament was unpredictable. Chefs who had once thrived under Marcus's mentorship now found themselves walking on eggshells, afraid to make even the smallest mistake. The constant pressure began to take its toll on the team. Several of the kitchen's most talented chefs, who had been loyal to the restaurant for years, decided to leave. Some moved to other restaurants in the city, while others left the industry altogether, burned out by the relentless stress of working under Huxley. With each departure, the kitchen lost not just skill, but the sense of community that had once made El Grand Epicurean special. Huxley tried to compensate by hiring new chefs, but the turnover was high. Many of the new hires lacked the experience or passion of the original team, and the revolving door of staff only contributed to the growing instability in the kitchen. The service became erratic. Some nights the kitchen would run smoothly, but on others, dishes would go out late, undercooked, or improperly seasoned. Mistakes that would have been unthinkable under Marcus's leadership began to creep into the food. At first, the mistakes were small: a slightly overcooked piece of fish, a sauce that lacked depth. But over time, these errors began to add up. The regular patrons who had once been enchanted by the creative and flavorful dishes Marcus had created started to notice. The magic that had drawn them to El Grand Epicurean seemed to be fading. Word of mouth, once the restaurant's greatest asset, began to turn against it. Loyal customers found themselves disappointed with the inconsistency, and slowly, the reservations that had once been booked weeks in advance began to dwindle. Reviews followed suit. Food critics who had previously sung the restaurant's praises started writing about the decline in quality. They mentioned how the food had lost its spark, how the once vibrant atmosphere now felt cold and clinical. Mr. Huxley's menu, while technically proficient, lacked the warmth and soul that had made the restaurant a favorite. Instead of creating dishes that resonated with diners, he seemed more focused on impressing them with flashy techniques and overly complicated presentations. The connection between the food and the people eating it was lost. As the restaurant's reputation continued to slide, the financial pressure mounted. El Grand Epicurean had always been a high-end establishment, and its survival depended on maintaining its exclusive status. But with fewer customers coming through the doors and fewer rave reviews to keep it in the spotlight, the restaurant started hemorrhaging money. The owners, who had once fully supported Mr. Huxley's vision, began to question whether they had made the right choice in bringing him on board. Behind closed doors, there were tense meetings and whispered discussions about the future of the restaurant. But Mr. Huxley, blinded by his own ego, refused to acknowledge the problems. In his mind, the restaurant's decline wasn't his fault. It was the fault of the team, the critics, and the diners who didn't appreciate his genius. Instead of adapting or seeking advice, Huxley doubled down on his approach. He pushed the kitchen staff harder, demanding more from them while offering no support. He introduced increasingly complex dishes that were difficult to execute, putting even more pressure on an already strained team. The more the restaurant struggled, the more Huxley tightened his grip, convinced that if he just worked harder, if he just refined his techniques further, everything would turn around. But it didn't. Instead, things continued to unravel. The restaurant's financial losses became too significant to ignore, and the owners were forced to take drastic measures. Staff hours were cut, and certain ingredients, once sourced from the finest suppliers, were replaced with cheaper alternatives. The quality of the food continued to deteriorate, and the once grand dining room began to lose its luster. The tables that had once been filled with eager patrons were now often empty, and the atmosphere that had once buzzed with excitement now felt hollow. For Mr. Huxley, the decline of El Grand Epicurean was a bitter pill to swallow. He had entered the restaurant with grand ambitions, believing that he could take it to new heights. But instead, under his leadership, the restaurant was spiraling toward ruin. Late at night, after the kitchen had closed and the dining room had emptied, Huxley would sit alone in his office, poring over the books, trying to figure out where it had all gone wrong. But he never looked inward. He never questioned his own decisions or his treatment of the staff. In his mind, the failure of El Grand Epicurean was a collective one, not his own. Despite the mounting evidence that things were falling apart, Huxley clung to the belief that he could turn it around. But as more staff members left, as more patrons chose to dine elsewhere, and as the financial situation grew increasingly dire, even he began to feel the weight of his failures. He became irritable, lashing out at the remaining staff more frequently. His once pristine appearance became disheveled, and the confident swagger he had once carried was replaced by a nervous energy. The pressure was consuming him. Eventually, the owners of El Grand Epicurean could no longer ignore the situation. They had invested too much in the restaurant to watch it fail completely, and they knew that drastic changes needed to be made. Mr. Huxley was called into a meeting with the owners, where they laid out the stark reality. The restaurant was on the brink of closure. The losses were unsustainable, and unless something changed soon, El Grand Epicurean would be forced to shut its doors for good. Huxley was devastated. The restaurant, which he had seen as his opportunity to shine, was now slipping through his fingers. He had poured everything into it, but it wasn't enough. For the first time, he began to realize that he couldn't fix it on his own. The kitchen was in disarray, the staff was demoralized, and the reputation of the restaurant was in tatters. He had driven away the people who could have helped him, people like Marcus, and now he was left standing in the ruins of his own making. As he walked out of that meeting, Huxley felt a deep sense of defeat. He had been so focused on proving himself that he had lost sight of what truly made a restaurant successful: the people, the heart, and the soul behind the food. And now, with El Grand Epicurean on the verge of collapse, he wasn't sure if there was anything left to save. But unbeknownst to Huxley, a lifeline was coming, one that he never would have expected. Marcus, now a successful restaurateur in his own right, was about to offer him something that would change both of their lives forever. And in that offer, Huxley would be forced to confront not only the mistakes he had made, but also the possibility of redemption. As Roots and Wings continued to thrive, Marcus found himself reflecting on how far he had come since those dark days after being fired from El Grand Epicurean. His success was undeniable. His restaurant had become one of the hottest dining spots in the city, and his name was now synonymous with innovation and resilience. Yet, as he looked around at the full dining room, the satisfied faces of patrons enjoying his food, and the team he had carefully nurtured, there was a lingering sense that his journey wasn't quite complete. Marcus had grown, not just as a chef, but as a person. He had come to realize that the obstacles he had faced had shaped him in ways he hadn't understood at the time. The challenges had pushed him to dig deeper, to find strength he didn't know he had, and to refine not only his cooking, but his character. He had risen from the ashes of a painful experience, and in doing so, he had built something beautiful. But there was one chapter in his story that still felt unresolved: his relationship with Mr. Huxley and the legacy of El Grand Epicurean. Word had reached Marcus that El Grand Epicurean was struggling, and the news didn't surprise him. He knew better than anyone how fragile a restaurant could be, how quickly things could unravel if the right balance of leadership, creativity, and teamwork wasn't in place. Despite his personal success, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness for the restaurant he had once called home. El Grand Epicurean had been more than just a job for him. It had been a place where he had dreamed, grown, and connected with people through his food. Seeing it on the brink of closure, even under Huxley's leadership, felt like a loss, not just for him, but for the city and for the legacy of what the restaurant had once been. One evening, after the last patrons had left Roots and Wings, Marcus sat in the quiet of the empty restaurant, thinking about what he had built and what had been lost at El Grand Epicurean. As he reflected, a thought occurred to him, an idea that surprised even him. What if he could save El Grand Epicurean? What if instead of watching it fade away, he could offer it new life? It was a bold idea, but the more Marcus thought about it, the more it made sense. After all, El Grand Epicurean had played a significant role in his journey, even if it had ended badly. And now, with his own success and experience, he was in a position to do something about it. But there was another layer to this idea: Mr. Huxley. Marcus couldn't deny that part of him still harbored resentment toward the man who had humiliated him and derailed his career. Forgiving Huxley had been a personal journey, but offering him a lifeline was something else entirely. Yet, Marcus also knew that true growth meant rising above the bitterness of the past. He had already proven himself. He had nothing to gain by holding on to old grudges. Instead, he saw an opportunity to turn the story on its head, to do something unexpected, something that would not only help the restaurant, but also show the world the power of forgiveness and reconciliation. With his mind made up, Marcus reached out to Evelyn, his trusted partner and confidant. He explained his idea to her, laying out his plan to approach Mr. Huxley with an offer to buy El Grand Epicurean and incorporate it into the Roots and Wings brand. Evelyn, ever the pragmatist, raised a skeptical eyebrow at first. "Are you sure about this, Marcus?" she asked. "After everything he put you through, you're really willing to work with him again?" Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful but resolute. "I've been thinking about it a lot," he said. "I don't want to live with that anger anymore. And I think there's something powerful in offering a second chance, not just for the restaurant, but for Huxley too. He's not a bad chef. He's just lost his way. Maybe this could be an opportunity for both of us to rebuild something better." Evelyn considered his words carefully. She had seen firsthand the transformation Marcus had undergone and knew that his success had been fueled not just by his talent, but by his heart. If anyone could pull off something like this, it was Marcus. Finally, she smiled and said, "All right, let's do it." With Evelyn's support, Marcus set the wheels in motion. He arranged a meeting with the owners of El Grand Epicurean, who were more than willing to hear him out. The restaurant was on the verge of financial ruin, and they knew that Marcus's offer might be the only chance to save it. After some negotiation, a deal was struck. Marcus would acquire the restaurant and bring it under the Roots and Wings umbrella, blending the best of both establishments to create something new, something that honored the legacy of both restaurants. But the hardest part of Marcus's plan was still ahead: approaching Mr. Huxley. After everything that had happened between them, Marcus wasn't sure how Huxley would react to his offer. He knew it would be humbling, perhaps even humiliating, for Huxley to accept help from someone he had treated so poorly. But Marcus also knew that this was about more than just business. It was about offering a hand of forgiveness, a chance for both of them to move forward. The day of their meeting arrived, and Marcus found himself standing outside El Grand Epicurean, a place that was once so familiar to him. It had changed in his absence. The once vibrant energy was gone, replaced by a sense of weariness. The windows were dimly lit, and the once busy dining room looked half empty. Marcus took a deep breath and stepped inside, making his way to the back office where Huxley was waiting. When Marcus entered the room, Huxley looked up, surprised to see him. There was a brief moment of tension as the two men faced each other, the weight of their shared history hanging in the air. Huxley's appearance had changed since Marcus last saw him. He looked tired, older, and the confidence he had once carried seemed to have been replaced by a nervous energy. "Marcus," Huxley said, his voice tinged with both surprise and something that resembled regret. "I wasn't expecting to see you." Marcus nodded, his expression calm but serious. "I'm here because I think we both know that El Grand Epicurean is in trouble," he said, getting straight to the point. "And I think we both know that things haven't gone the way you wanted them to." Huxley's shoulders sagged slightly, and for a moment, he didn't say anything. He looked around the office, at the piles of paperwork, the spreadsheets showing the restaurant's losses, and then back at Marcus. "You're right," he finally admitted. "It's falling apart. I've tried everything, but nothing's working." Marcus took a seat across from Huxley, his tone measured and sincere. "I've been thinking about this for a while," he said. "I want to buy El Grand Epicurean. I want to bring it into roots and wings. But I don't want to just take it over. I want you to stay on as a consultant, to help guide the transition and bring your expertise to the table. I know things haven't been easy between us, but I think this could be an opportunity for both of us to rebuild, not just the restaurant, but ourselves." Huxley stared at Marcus, clearly taken aback by the offer. He opened his mouth to speak, but seemed to struggle to find the words. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he said, "Why? After everything I did, why would you want to help me?" Marcus looked him in the eye and replied, "Because I've learned that holding on to anger doesn't help anyone. I've moved on, Huxley. I've built something that I'm proud of, but I haven't forgotten where I came from. El Grand Epicurean was a part of my journey, and I think it still has potential. And I believe people deserve second chances. You gave me mine when you hired me here, even if things didn't end well. I'm offering you one now." The silence in the room was thick with emotion. Huxley, once so proud and unyielding, looked vulnerable in that moment. He was faced with a choice: accept Marcus's offer and the humility that came with it, or let his pride drive him to further ruin. After a long pause, Huxley nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't deserve this," he said, "but thank you." Marcus stood up and extended his hand. "We both deserve the chance to start fresh," he said. Huxley hesitated for a moment, then shook Marcus's hand, sealing not just a business deal, but a new chapter in both of their lives. It was a moment of reconciliation, a moment that symbolized the power of forgiveness, growth, and second chances. With the handshake between Marcus and Mr. Huxley, the stage was set for a remarkable transformation, one that would blend the legacy of El Grand Epicurean with the innovative spirit of Roots and Wings. It wasn't just about saving a restaurant. It was about healing old wounds, forging new partnerships, and creating something that was greater than the sum of its parts. The first step in the process was rebuilding the trust of the staff and breathing new life into the kitchen. Many of the original team members had left, and those who remained were dispirited, worn down by months of tension and uncertainty under Huxley's leadership. Marcus knew that if the restaurant was going to succeed, he had to foster the same sense of community and collaboration that had made Roots and Wings such a success. He couldn't simply step in and impose his will. This needed to be a team effort, one where everyone felt valued and empowered. Marcus began by holding meetings with the staff, not in a formal boardroom setting, but in the heart of the restaurant, the kitchen. He wanted to hear their thoughts, their frustrations, and their hopes for the future. He approached these conversations with humility, recognizing that for many of them, working at El Grand Epicurean had once been a source of pride. He wanted to reignite that pride and make them feel part of the journey ahead. At first, there was skepticism. Some of the staff had heard about Marcus's success at Roots and Wings, but they couldn't help wondering why he would want to return to a place that had treated him so poorly. Others had been so demoralized by Huxley's leadership that they weren't sure if they could trust anyone, let alone Marcus. But slowly, as Marcus listened to their concerns and shared his vision for the restaurant, the mood began to shift. He didn't promise quick fixes or grandiose changes. Instead, he focused on restoring a sense of purpose and joy in the kitchen, reminding them of why they had chosen to become chefs in the first place. Marcus also worked closely with Huxley during this period, helping him transition into his new role as a consultant. It wasn't an easy adjustment for Huxley, who had gone from being the head chef to now working under the leadership of the man he had once dismissed. But Marcus was patient, understanding that this was as much a personal journey for Huxley as it was a professional one. Over time, Huxley began to soften. He still had valuable skills and knowledge, and Marcus made sure to highlight those strengths, inviting Huxley to share his expertise where it was needed. Marcus didn't see this as a demotion for Huxley, but rather a chance for him to contribute in a different, more supportive way. One of the first big challenges was redesigning the menu. Marcus knew that he couldn't simply impose the Roots and Wings style onto El Grand Epicurean without losing what had once made the restaurant special. He had to strike a balance between the elegance and sophistication that had defined El Grand Epicurean and the soulful, innovative approach that had made Roots and Wings a success. It was a delicate dance, honoring the past while embracing the future. Together with the chefs, Marcus and Huxley spent weeks experimenting with new dishes, combining the classic techniques that Huxley excelled at with the bold, flavor-forward approach that Marcus had become known for. The process wasn't always smooth. There were disagreements, moments of frustration, and countless revisions. But slowly, a new menu began to take shape, one that blended the refinement of haute cuisine with the warmth and creativity of soul food. It was a fusion that felt authentic, reflecting both the history of El Grand Epicurean and the future Marcus envisioned. The new menu featured dishes like pan-seared scallops with a smoked sweet potato puree, a nod to both the fine dining roots of the restaurant and Marcus's love of southern flavors. There was a duck confit served with collard greens and a tangy citrus reduction, and a signature dish that combined Huxley's classical training with Marcus's innovative spirit. Braised short ribs with a red wine reduction, paired with a delicate truffle mac and cheese. Each dish told a story, not just of culinary technique, but of redemption and collaboration. As the menu took shape, the next challenge was reintroducing El Grand Epicurean to the public. The restaurant had lost many of its loyal patrons, and its reputation had taken a hit in the months since Marcus had left. But Marcus knew that if they could get people through the door, the food and the story behind it would speak for itself. He and his team launched a carefully planned reopening campaign, emphasizing the restaurant's new direction while honoring its past. Evelyn Wright, ever the savvy critic and supporter, wrote a glowing piece about the transformation, praising Marcus not just for his culinary skill, but for his leadership and vision. On the night of the grand reopening, there was a buzz of excitement in the air. The dining room, which had once felt empty and lifeless, was now filled with anticipation. Patrons, both old and new, gathered to experience the new chapter of El Grand Epicurean. The restaurant had been redesigned to reflect the fusion of styles, elegant yet welcoming, with soft lighting, warm wooden accents, and a few nods to roots and wings, such as art that celebrated Southern food traditions. As the first dishes began to leave the kitchen, Marcus stood back, watching his team work. The energy in the kitchen was different now. There was a sense of purpose, of joy. The chefs, once weary and uncertain, now moved with confidence, their creativity reignited. And at the center of it all was Marcus, leading not with an iron fist, but with the quiet strength of someone who understood the value of collaboration, of lifting others up. The diners were blown away. The new menu was a revelation, each dish beautifully executed, with layers of flavor and a sense of narrative that connected the past and the present. Critics who had once written off El Grand Epicurean as a restaurant in decline were now praising its rebirth, and the reservations began to flood in once more. But perhaps the most significant transformation was happening behind the scenes with Mr. Huxley. As the restaurant's fortunes improved, so too did Huxley's outlook. At first, he had struggled with his new role, feeling a deep sense of shame over how things had fallen apart under his leadership. But Marcus, ever patient and wise, encouraged Huxley to embrace this new chapter as an opportunity for growth, not failure. Huxley began to see that his role as a consultant didn't mean he had been sidelined. It meant that he could contribute in ways that played to his strengths without the crushing pressure of leading the kitchen. He started working closely with the younger chefs, mentoring them in the classical techniques that he had mastered over the years. And in doing so, Huxley found a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just a chef, clinging to past glories. He was part of something bigger, something that was evolving and growing. Over time, Huxley and Marcus developed a mutual respect, something that had been unthinkable just months earlier. They had come from very different places, but in the crucible of the restaurant industry, they had found common ground. Huxley even began to acknowledge, quietly at first, the mistakes he had made in the past, how his arrogance had blinded him to the value of the people around him, how he had pushed away the very people who could have helped him succeed. And while Marcus never sought an apology, Huxley's quiet transformation spoke louder than words. As the months passed, El Grand Epicurean and Roots and Wings became sister restaurants, each drawing from the strengths of the other. Patrons who dined at one often found themselves eager to experience the other, intrigued by the blend of styles and the story behind the collaboration. The success of both restaurants became a testament not just to culinary skill, but to the power of resilience, forgiveness, and the willingness to grow. Marcus, ever humble, never sought the spotlight for himself. He continued to work side by side with his team, mentoring young chefs, experimenting with new dishes, and fostering the sense of community that had always been at the heart of his vision. And while he had achieved more than he had ever dreamed, 2 successful restaurants, the respect of his peers, and the love of his patrons. He knew that the greatest success of all was the journey he had taken and the lives he had touched along the way. As for Huxley, he had found peace in his new role. No longer driven by ego or the need to prove himself, he had embraced the idea that true success wasn't about individual accolades, but about the impact he could have on others. Together, Marcus and Huxley had breathed new life into El Grand Epicurean, not just saving a restaurant, but transforming it into a place that celebrated collaboration, creativity, and the healing power of food. The story of El Grand Epicurean and Roots and Wings, Became Morthan, Just, a tale of culinary triumph. It was a story of redemption, of second chances, and of the belief that even the most broken relationships could be mended with patience, humility, and a shared passion for something greater than oneself. As Marcus stood in the bustling dining room of Roots and Wings, watching the familiar faces of satisfied patrons enjoying their meals, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The transformation of both Roots and Wings and El Grand Epicurean was a testament to the power of resilience, creativity, and above all, the belief in second chances. Yet, there was one final piece to this journey that remained, one that Marcus hadn't fully anticipated, but now felt compelled to address. It was the question that had lingered in his mind since the day he made the decision to extend an olive branch to Mr. Huxley. Would he have been able to forgive him if the roles were reversed? As the years had passed, Marcus had learned that true growth comes not just from achieving success, but from reflecting on the journey that got you there. He had seen how anger and bitterness, if left unchecked, could poison even the most talented and well-meaning people. He had experienced firsthand how the weight of carrying unresolved pain could hold you back from reaching your full potential. And now, as someone who had risen above that pain, Marcus wanted to share the lessons he had learned with others, not just through his food, but through the story of his own transformation. One evening, as Marcus sat with Evelyn Wright, discussing the success of both restaurants and the road that had led them here, Evelyn broached a subject that had been on her mind for some time. "You know," she began, swirling the glass of wine in her hand, "the story of what you did for El Grand Epicurean and Huxley is more than just a tale of a restaurant comeback. It's a story that people need to hear. The world is full of stories about rivalry, betrayal, and competition. But how often do we hear about forgiveness? About second chances?" She paused, looking at Marcus intently. "I think there's something powerful in what you did, Marcus, and I think people could learn from it." Marcus thought about her words. He had never sought attention for his act of forgiveness. It had been something deeply personal, a way to heal and move forward. But Evelyn was right. The world was in desperate need of stories that uplifted, that showed the potential for growth, even in the face of adversity. People needed to know that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting the past, but about choosing not to let it control the future. With Evelyn's encouragement, Marcus began crafting a plan to share his story with a broader audience, not in a self-congratulatory way, but in a way that could inspire others to reflect on their own lives, their own relationships, and the places where they might be holding on to pain that no longer served them. He knew that the story wasn't just about him. It was about every person who had faced a difficult situation, every person who had been wronged, every person who had struggled to forgive. A few weeks later, Marcus found himself in front of a camera, preparing to record a video that would serve as both a reflection on his journey and an invitation for others to consider their own paths. The camera crew was small, but the atmosphere was intimate and focused. Evelyn had helped set it up, knowing that Marcus's story deserved to be told in his own words, without embellishment or fanfare. As the camera rolled, Marcus spoke from the heart. He shared his experiences, how he had been feared from El Grand Epicurean by Huxley, how he had struggled to find his footing afterward, and how he had eventually found redemption through Roots and Wings. He talked about the bitterness he had carried for months, the weight of feeling betrayed by someone he had once respected. But more importantly, he talked about the moment when he realized that holding on to that anger was only hurting himself. "It wasn't easy," Marcus said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "There were days when I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, about how unfair it all felt. But then I realized something. I was giving Mr. Huxley power over my life by letting that bitterness define me. And I knew that if I wanted to move forward, if I wanted to build something meaningful, I had to let it go." He paused, looking directly into the camera, as if speaking to each individual watching the video. Forgiveness isn't about excusing what someone did. It's about freeing yourself from the prison of anger and resentment. It's about saying, "I'm not going to let this define who I am." Marcus went on to describe how extending an offer to Huxley, an offer to not only save El Grand Epicurean, but to work alongside him, had been one of the most difficult yet rewarding decisions of his life. He explained how, in the process of rebuilding the restaurant, he had seen Huxley transform as well. The once proud and closed-off chef had become someone who was more open, more willing to learn, and more humble. "There were days when I wondered if I'd made the right decision," Marcus admitted. "But then I realized that it wasn't just about saving a restaurant. It was about saving ourselves from the cycle of resentment and anger that can destroy everything if we let it." As the video neared its conclusion, Marcus posed the question that had been on his mind for so long, the question that he knew would resonate with anyone who had ever been wronged. "If you were in my shoes, would you have forgiven Mr. Huxley? Could you have extended that same lifeline, knowing everything that had happened?" He left the question hanging in the air, not as a challenge, but as an invitation for reflection. Marcus wanted people to think about their own lives, their own experiences of hurt, betrayal, and the paths they had taken, or could take, toward healing. The video ended with Marcus encouraging viewers to engage with the story, to share their thoughts, and to consider how forgiveness had played a role in their lives. He didn't sugarcoat the difficulties of the process, nor did he pretend that forgiveness was a simple, one-time decision. It was, as he described, a journey, one that required patience, introspection, and sometimes a willingness to take a leap of faith. After the video was posted online, the response was overwhelming. People from all walks of life reached out to Marcus, sharing their own stories of hurt and healing, of struggles with forgiveness, and of the moments when they had found the strength to let go of anger. Some admitted that they were still in the process of forgiving someone who had wronged them, while others expressed how Marcus's story had inspired them to take the first step toward reconciliation. But it wasn't just everyday people who were touched by Marcus's message. Chefs, restaurateurs, and leaders from various industries reached out to thank him for sharing such a vulnerable and honest account of his journey. They acknowledged that the culture of competition and rivalry in their fields often left little room for conversations about forgiveness and second chances. Marcus's story, they said, had opened their eyes to the importance of creating environments where people could grow, learn, and heal from past mistakes. The impact of the video extended far beyond what Marcus had anticipated. Invitations to speak at conferences, schools, and community organizations began to pour in. People wanted to hear more about his journey, not just as a chef, but as a person who had found a way to rise above the challenges life had thrown at him. Despite the newfound attention, Marcus remained humble. He wasn't interested in becoming a motivational speaker or a public figure. His heart was still in the kitchen, where he could continue creating dishes that told stories of resilience, heritage, and hope. But he recognized that his story had taken on a life of its own, and if sharing it could help others find peace and healing, then he was willing to step into that role. In the months and years that followed, Marcus continued to balance his work at Roots and Wings and El Grand Epicurean with his efforts to inspire others through his story. He started hosting workshops for young chefs, not just to teach them about cooking, but to mentor them in leadership, collaboration, and emotional intelligence. He knew that the restaurant industry, and indeed the world, needed more leaders who understood that success wasn't just about winning, but about lifting others up along the way. As for Mr. Huxley, his transformation continued as well. The collaboration with Marcus had given him a new perspective on leadership and life. He had become a more compassionate mentor to the younger chefs, no longer driven by ego, but by a desire to share his knowledge and help others succeed. He and Marcus maintained a respectful partnership, working together to ensure the continued success of both restaurants. The story of Marcus Hayes and Mr. Huxley became a symbol of the power of forgiveness, a reminder that even in the most competitive and high-pressure environments, there is room for grace, humility, and second chances. Through their journey, they had not only saved 2 restaurants, but had also proven that true success is measured not by individual accolades, but by the impact we have on those around us. In the end, Marcus knew that the most important lesson he could share with the world wasn't about cooking techniques or restaurant management. It was about the healing power of forgiveness. And in sharing that lesson, he hoped that others might find the courage to forgive, to heal, and to build something beautiful from the ashes of their past.